welcome to the stage.
Great. Thanks everyone for being here. It's really an honor to be on this stage. And my name is SPOTTIEWiFey, in real life, Dr. Melissa Walsh. I'm an OBGYN, born and raised in New York, trained there. I've been practicing for 12 plus years, time flies. And I really got into the NFT space because of my husband, SPOTTIEWiFey. It's an incredible journey to be on, and Web3 is really our future, and I feel like very honored to be part of it.
Yeah, me too. So my name's Aonia Traxler. My journey in healthcare is a little bit different. I'm not actually a doctor, but I did my undergraduate degree in pharmacology and molecular genetics here in London. And then I went on to do graduate school in computational biology and quantitative genetics at Harvard. Came back again to the UK to actually follow a passion project of mine, which is ethics, particularly data ethics I find quite interesting. And in my day job, I am a software engineer for a Web3 company. So yeah, excited to tackle kind of the intersection of so many of my passions here today.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, especially for me getting into NFTs through SPOTTIEWiFey, I saw more the value in entertainment, in art, sure. But there's a lot to be said about the blockchain technology and its applications to enhance patient data safety and system efficiency. So I'm very new in the space, but excited to join as a physician advocate because many of my colleagues have no idea what an NFT is.
Yeah.
Blockchain, little to no knowledge in the healthcare field, especially over in the States.
Yeah, it's true, and I think it's such an interesting time to actually delve into the space because just a month ago, actually, we had the 21st Century Care Act that got passed in the US. And what that actually meant is that in the US, you are now, you have the right to actually access your electronic health records digitally, which hasn't been the case before. So we're moving very much from this idea of data being or belonging to the service provider, that can be the electronic health record provider or the hospital, moving from that to actually us being the owners of the healthcare data. And it's similar to that whole kind of shift in mentality you're seeing in Web 2 to Web 3. And if we even just take a step back and look at what data ownership or the data economy looks like in Web 2 and why it's so problematic is that, if we even just look at Facebook, we all have Facebook probably, and with your Facebook likes, you can tell, with over 80% certainty in many cases, up to 90% certainty, your sexual orientation, who you vote for, your big 5 personality types, your ethnicity, so many things, and you actually get targeted with information based on this personal profile you have. And the scary thing for me kind of in the healthcare space is that you actually now have all these smart watches that collect data, you have electronic health apps, you have direct-to-consumer kits like from 23andMe, and that's all completely unregulated. So on top of being able to actually target you with particular information, you now have the physiological response, right? So okay, you see this, your heart rate goes up, this content gets you excited or whatnot. And that healthcare information is also sold to data brokers. It can be sold to your potential employers. And what that then means is particularly people who already struggle with poor health will have an even more difficult time finding employment. Because in the US particularly, what you see is that you actually have the employers sometimes paying for your healthcare or not.
Oh, yes.
And given that, poor health often is correlated again with lower socioeconomic status, in many ways we're making life more problematic for people who already have a harder time.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's always on the news, data breaches, health systems getting broken into, and this should be at the forefront of our thinking when we are creating these systems, because your health data is extremely personal and it should only be under your control. But the way that everything is set up now, it's like Facebook. almost.
Yeah.
And on top of it, there's, you don't own your own health data, and then you can't easily transfer that. So if you want to switch physicians, if you move to a different state, a different country, you need to request paper records to be faxed. Maybe you'll be lucky and get a PDF form, but it's still the 80s in American healthcare, and we're using the fax to transfer information, and a lot of things fall through the cracks. There is a lot of medical errors that occur because the data isn't transferred or it's not transcribed properly, and through using blockchain technology and NFTs, we would be able to give the patients ownership of their data. One of the things that I've gotten involved with is an organization called HPEC, or the Humanitarian Physicians Empowerment Community, started by Dr. Leah Houston. And basically what it does is create a platform in which physicians can put their credentials to enable an easier transfer from hospital to hospital, from system to system. That's verified once, it's on the blockchain, it's undeniable, immutable, and we could just, in the hopefully near future, just use that to mobilize through the system, whether just in the US, but also internationally. I mean, a pandemic really showed all of the holes, even more so in the system, and when we had to have people moved around the country for physician shortage, nursing shortage, all of the rules went out the window, and it was just like, we just need bodies. And we saw how easily we could get those credentials lined up, all of your documents together, but now it's going back to the old system where it'll take 4 to 6 months to credential. You have millions of dollars lost to the hospital, to the physicians, to patient care because of this delay with this Web 2 ancient technology.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. And even if we think about what can we do with, a lot of this data when we do attach it to the blockchain, and again, the individual has ownership and can say, hey, I want, maybe my physician to be able to access my data, but also I'd like to maybe donate some of it to a data commons so you can have academic institutions that conduct research with it. Yeah. Or if you do want to monetize it, since currently it is being monetized by a lot of people, except for the people who actually should own the data, you'd have the option to do that as well. So that for me is, those are all super interesting use cases to begin with. Because yeah, I mean, look at 23andMe, right? You're providing your genetic data. Mm-hmm. They have deals for, hundreds of millions, and you don't really benefit much from it, which shouldn't be the case in my opinion.
No, for sure. I think it's only coming to light in more recent years that there is all of this personal data that is a huge economy internationally, but when it comes to our health data, I think as a physician, knowing that there can be a use case for protecting my patient's data and making it more easily transferable, I think it restores the trust in the doctor-patient relationship that is the original intent. It's what you expect when you go to a physician, and to know that when you leave, you move away from that physician and from that health system, you should be able to take that data with you. Part of what HPEC is doing is by creating verified credentials, then whatever medical records I produce as a verified physician, therefore are verified themselves, and so you don't have errors in the medical record, or your next physician guessing on what was done. Is this legitimate? Because it's all just on the blockchain.
I'm curious, how are your colleagues responding to this? Are they speaking about it? Are they worried? Are they excited? Is there a general sentiment around blockchain and healthcare?
There is excitement, but more confusion, because especially in the US, our healthcare system, I could go on forever, is just extremely complex and very corporatized. And so we're all kind of in the weeds at the front line, you don't have a lot of time to like think about these macro system problems. And I think you know, getting into this kind of level of tech will, you know, from a physician perspective, we need to be the ones to guide it in the right way, because if we don't guide it, it's going to continue to be a corporatized system like what we have now.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the US, I read somewhere that I think you spend 20% of GDP on healthcare. So if you can manage to be a little bit more efficient and people can actually carry their data from one hospital to another, they don't have to get all these procedures over and over, which is also a burden psychologically on top of the monetary burden.
Yes, it's huge.
Yeah. There's a bunch of other interesting things going on as well. Like I find the whole drug supply chain aspect that comes with blockchain quite interesting. So what you've seen there, I think, so the FDA is trying to implement a drug supply chain security act by 2023. So there are actually a lot of pharma companies already collaborating and doing trials in this area. But the idea there is that you actually have 100,000 to 1 million deaths annually due to counterfeit drugs, which I thought was incredibly high. You have about 1 to 2%, according to the World Health Organization, of drugs which are counterfeit in developed countries. The numbers and the estimates for developing countries are between 10 and 20%, so even higher. So the idea there, if you start applying, you know, the blockchain to the supply chain, particularly for drugs, would be that at the stage of manufacturing, you could potentially create an NFT for whatever drug you're producing, and then that gets transferred, you know, down the supply chain to from the manufacturer to the distributor to, again, you know, the pharmacy maybe, and you as a consumer can see, okay, you know I'm not getting a counterfeit drug, which, you know, you'd expect, but you actually even had recently in the US a anti-cancer drug, Avastin, which was delivered to patients and was actually a counterfeit drug. So, yeah.
It's incredible. I'm just thinking about, you know, also part of our development with protecting patient data does need to bring in our original like Hippocratic oath and the ethos of being in the medical field. A lot of the waste in U.S. healthcare is from, you know, unnecessary ER visits, repetitive testing, people getting 3 CAT scans in a week because they're just shopping at different hospitals. But if you had all of your health data just tied to the one place, then you could reduce that redundant, wasteful practice.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, the question is really, as so often, if patients even want this, because again, it is, I guess, a big burden to have to be in charge of your own healthcare data. But I do think it's important that we ask to take control, and that even governments like the U.S. are pushing for that, I think is great.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of interesting projects in the space that even allow you to upload your data, be it iMedis, for instance. So they allow you to upload your data, structure it in a certain type of way, and by structuring it in this particular way, you can actually run particular algorithms on it, so you can actually monetize it. To another interesting, have you come across the topic of IP NFTs?
No.
So there's also a company called Molecule, and what they're actually doing is they're tying research to NFTs. So this is more, I guess, my background, not so much the doctor side, but the research side, where you end up with a system currently in research where the early stages of research are well funded, typically by governments, and the later stages are also typically well funded, but this is by pharmaceutical companies, so those are the clinical trials. But in between those two stages, you have very, very much a lack of funding. It's actually so much so that it's referred to the valley of death in drug discovery and development. And what they're trying to do is actually upload that all onto an NFT, and in that way turn it into a liquid investable asset and try to bring closer, investors and researchers. So that's quite interesting, both from the visibility point of view, but then also, I guess it's also quite interesting because it allows for paradigm shifts to happen more easily in the healthcare space. I mean, what we've seen is that there are current paradigms with which one has to research. For instance, within Alzheimer research, what you see is there's this beta amyloid hypothesis, which has not delivered a lot of success over the past decades, but people can't seem to move away from. I have a lot of friends who are considering doing PhDs in that field, but ended up saying, hey, if the only thing I can research is if I follow this particular theory, and this theory has not, led to any results, why would I do that? So it does act also as an alternative funding mechanism, where when I was looking through what they're researching, is one of the projects is actually a Alzheimer's project, focusing on finding novel mechanisms of actions. And we have this quote that actually Max Planck came up with, that paradigm shifts or scientific revolutions often don't happen necessarily through rational debate, where you see your opponent, make your opponent see light, but rather the death of one tenure-track professor or one big researcher at a time, since we live in an age-graded hierarchy. So I think it's also interesting for maybe alternative research.
Oh, that's a great application. I did see something recently about the use of blockchain and AI modeling for the histopathology of certain cancers, and how they're using that in pooled de-identified data to target better therapies depending on the histopathology or the cell type of whichever cancer is being treated. And I think that's an incredible application to move forward, especially with these ever-changing diseases and what we've seen with COVID and still learning about. That could also be an application there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious if the audience would actually ever consider putting their healthcare data on the blockchain, or actually engage with any of those upcoming trends. Would anybody be interested or not really?
That guy.
Yeah. I think personally it should be, and typically if you look at the projects that are around, the data is anonymized. What you actually see, unfortunately, with the current healthcare system is that often your data is just shared with, again, data brokers, with insurances, and it's oftentimes not anonymized as it goes with our current healthcare systems. But the whole idea of privacy and anonymization is kind of the big question mark in the space, how to properly do it.
Yeah, I think from what I've learned so far, the goal, when you have verified providers making verified medical records, is that the patient has ownership of those medical records for themselves, and in order for that to be accessed, there are keys to be used on both sides to allow, what you want. If you just want them to see the notes, if you just want them to see the images or the labs, that you can control that as you should, because it's about you and your health.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Should we open it to an audience question, or is there something that you still want to cover?
No, sure.
Does anybody have any questions, or? Okay.
No?
Well, wonderful. We're perfectly on time.
Good. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.